At 11:47 p.m., Maria Gonzalez sat on the cold marble floor next to the hunched figure of an elderly man who everyone called the Beast. He was crying. The same man who had screamed at her for using the wrong cleaning solution just hours earlier. He was now sobbing like a broken child, and she had no idea that with one simple act of kindness, she was about to change both their lives forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy heartwarming stories about unexpected connections, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Maria had been working the night shift at the prestigious Meridian Tower for 3 months, and in all that time, she'd never seen anyone treat the building's mysterious elderly resident with anything but fear and resentment. The other janitors warned her about him on her first day. "Stay away from the old man on the 15th floor," they said. "He's mean as a rattlesnake and twice as poisonous. Lost his wife years ago and never got over it. Management keeps him around because he pays his rent on time, but he makes everyone's life miserable." The warning seemed justified. Every night, without fail, the old man would emerge from his apartment at exactly midnight, shuffling through the hallways in his worn slippers, inspecting every corner with the intensity of a military commander. He would bark at anyone he encountered, criticizing their work, complaining about noise levels, and generally making the already difficult night shift even more unbearable. The security guards called him the Beast behind his back, and even the building's day manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, would visibly tense whenever his name came up in conversation. But Maria saw something different in those angry, gray eyes. Maybe it was because she understood loneliness in a way that most people couldn't. At 28, she was raising her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, completely alone, working 3 jobs just to afford their tiny 1-bedroom apartment across town. Her ex-husband had disappeared when Emma was 2, leaving behind only a mountain of debt and a restraining order that Maria had been forced to file after too many nights of fear. The janitor position at Meridian Tower was her lifeline, paying enough to cover Emma's after-school care and maybe, if she was lucky, start saving for a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. Every night, Maria would arrive at the Towerings glass building at 10 p.m., change into her gray uniform, and begin the methodical process of cleaning 30 floors of offices, lobbies, and common areas. The work was physically demanding, but she found a strange peace in the solitude. The empty hallways gave her time to think, to plan, to dream about a better future for Emma. She would listen to audiobooks through her earbuds, learning about business management and child psychology, anything that might help her eventually move up in the world. The first time she encountered the old man, she was on the 15th floor, carefully dusting the expensive artwork that lined the residential hallway. It was her second week on the job, and she was still learning the building's layout and routines. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and out stepped a tall, gaunt figure with wild white hair and clothes that looked like they had been expensive once, but were now wrinkled and stained. His face was deeply lined, with high cheekbones and hollow cheeks that gave him an almost skeletal appearance. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, steel gray and burning with an intensity that made her take a step back. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough and gravelly, as if he hadn't used it in hours. "What are you doing here?" Maria straightened, trying to project confidence despite the fact that her heart was racing. "I am Maria, the new night janitor. I'm just cleaning the artwork, sir." "Well, you're doing it wrong," he snapped, moving closer to inspect her work. "That cloth is too rough for the painting surface. You'll damage the varnish. Don't they train you people properly?" Heat rose in Maria's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with difficult people before, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. "I apologize, sir. Could you show me the correct way?" The old man paused, clearly surprised by her response. Most people either argued with him or simply avoided him altogether. He studied her face for a long moment, then muttered something under his breath and shuffled away, leaving Maria confused but oddly curious about the angry stranger. Over the following weeks, their encounters became routine. Every night around midnight, he would appear, always finding something to criticize about her work. The windows weren't clean enough. The floors needed a different type of polish. The lobby plants weren't being watered properly. But Maria began to notice things that others missed. The criticism was always technically accurate. He knew the building's maintenance requirements better than anyone, and his suggestions, while harshly delivered, actually helped her do her job better. More importantly, she noticed that he was always alone, always looking lost, despite his aggressive demeanor. One night in her 7th week, Maria was cleaning the lobby when she overheard 2 security guards talking about him. "The Beast is getting worse," one of them said. "Found him standing in the stairwell at 3 a.m. last night, just staring at the wall, probably losing his mind like his wife did." "My cousin works at the bank where he used to have accounts," the other guard replied. "Said he used to be somebody important, owned a bunch of buildings or something. But after his wife died, he just went crazy, spent all his money on medical, bills trying to save her, then lost everything else, drinking and gambling. Lucky for him, the new owners of this place let him stay on as a tenant." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The new owners. She had assumed the building was owned by some faceless corporation, like most of the high-rises in the city. But if the old man used to own buildings, and if the new owners were letting him stay out of charity or pity, then who exactly were these new owners? That question haunted her thoughts as she continued her rounds that night. When midnight approached and the old man didn't appear for his usual inspection, she found herself worried. It was silly, she told herself. She should be grateful for a night without his harsh criticism. But something felt wrong. She finished her assigned floors and then, against her better judgment, took the elevator up to the 15th floor. The residential hallway was quieter than usual, and the soft lighting cast long shadows that made the expensive artwork look eerie and surreal. She walked slowly past the doors, listening for any signs of life until she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Someone was crying. The sound was coming from the end of the hallway, near the emergency stairwell. It was a broken, anguished sound, the kind of crying that comes from deep, unhealed wounds. Maria hesitated for a moment, knowing she could get in serious trouble for being on the residential floor without authorization. But something stronger than fear pulled her forward. She found him sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up to his chest like a child. The aggressive posture and harsh expression were completely gone, replaced by something so vulnerable and raw that Maria felt tears spring to her own eyes. In his hands, he clutched a small, framed photograph, and even in the dim light, she could see that it showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the old man looked up and saw her standing there, and instead of the anger she expected, his face crumpled with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for anyone to see me like this." Without thinking, Maria sat down beside him on the cold marble floor. It was completely against protocol, and if anyone found them there, she could lose her job immediately. But in that moment, none of that mattered. She had seen the same kind of pain in her own mirror too many times to walk away from it now. "You don't have to apologize," she said softly. "Everyone needs to cry sometimes." He stared at her in amazement, as if no one had spoken to him with kindness in years. "Today is our anniversary," he said finally, his voice breaking. 42 years. She would have been 70 today if the cancer hadn't... He couldn't finish the sentence. Maria felt her heart breaking for this bitter, lonely man. What was her name? "Eleanor," he whispered, looking down at the photograph. "Everyone called her Ellie. She was everything good in the world. Everything I'm not." "Tell me about her," Maria said gently. And to her surprise, he did. For the next hour, sitting on that cold floor, the old man transformed before her eyes. The harsh lines in his face softened as he talked about Eleanor, and his voice lost its bitter edge. He told her about how they met at a coffee shop in 1975, how she was a teacher who believed every child could learn if given enough patience and care. He talked about their adventures traveling the world, about the real estate empire they built together, about the laughter that filled their home every day for 41 years. "I used to own this building," he admitted quietly. "Owned 12 buildings in the city. Ellie and I, we were going to start a foundation, help kids from low-income families get better education. She had it all planned out." His voice broke again. "But when she got sick, nothing else mattered. I spent everything trying to save her. Experimental, treatments, specialists, anything that might buy us more time. When she died, I realized I'd lost not just my wife, but everything we'd built together." Maria listened without judgment, occasionally offering a quiet word of comfort. She understood loss and desperation in ways that most people couldn't. She thought about her own struggles, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would pay rent, about the guilt she felt for working so much that she barely saw Emma during the week. "The new owners," she said carefully, "they let you stay here?" The old man, she still didn't know his name, let out a bitter laugh. "They don't know I exist. The lease is still in my name from when I owned the building. I pay my rent through an automatic bank transfer. And management just assumes I'm another tenant. It's easier than trying to explain that I used to own their livelihood." As they sat there in the quiet hallway, Maria began to understand the depth of his isolation. He wasn't just grieving his wife, he was grieving his entire identity. Everything that had defined him, his success, his status, his sense of purpose, had disappeared along with Eleanor. No wonder he lashed out at everyone around him. He was drowning in a sea of loss and pain, and anger was the only life preserver he could find. "What's your name?" she asked finally. He looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten that people had names. "Henry," he said quietly. "Henry Morrison." "Well, Henry Morrison," Maria said, standing up and extending her hand to help him to his feet. "I think Eleanor would want you to honor her memory by living, not just surviving." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Maria was afraid she had overstepped. But Henry took her hand and let her help him up, and when he looked at her, there was something different in his eyes. Not the bitter anger she was used to, but something softer, almost hopeful. "You're probably right," he said quietly, "but I don't remember how to live anymore." That night marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Maria continued her nightly cleaning routine, but now when Henry appeared for his midnight inspections, their interactions were different. He still corrected her technique and pointed out areas that needed attention, but his criticism became constructive rather than cruel. More importantly, they began to talk. Henry told her about his life with Eleanor, about the business they had built together, about his regrets and fears. Maria shared her own story, the struggle of raising Emma alone, her dreams of creating a better life, her fears about the future. Slowly, they began to heal each other's wounds through simple human connection. The other staff members noticed the change, though they couldn't explain it. Henry stopped yelling at the security guards, and even began saying good morning to the day shift manager. He started dressing better, taking care of his appearance, and carrying himself with a dignity that reminded people of the successful businessman he had once been. But it was Maria who saw the most dramatic transformation. Henry began meeting her during her break times, bringing her coffee and sometimes homemade sandwiches. He would ask about Emma, remembering details about her school performances and friend drama that even Maria sometimes forgot. When Maria mentioned that she was studying business management through online courses, Henry's eyes lit up with interest. "I could teach you more in 6 months than those courses will teach you in 2 years, he said one night as they sat in the lobby during her break. "Real estate, business development, negotiation tactics. I spent 30 years learning those skills." And so began Maria's informal education in business and finance. Every night, after her cleaning duties were finished, Henry would spend an hour teaching her about property management, investment strategies, and entrepreneurship. He brought books from his apartment, drew diagrams on scratch paper, and shared war stories from his decades in business. Maria absorbed every lesson like a sponge. She had always been intelligent, but poverty and circumstances had limited her opportunities for formal education. Now, with Henry as her mentor, she began to see possibilities she had never imagined before. He taught her to read financial statements, to understand market trends, to recognize opportunities that others might miss. More importantly, Henry began to find purpose again. Teaching Maria reminded him of the foundation he and Eleanor had planned to start. He threw himself into her education with the same passion he had once brought to building his empire, and for the first time since Eleanor's death, he felt useful again. 3 months into their friendship, Henry made an announcement that shocked Maria to her core. "I've been thinking about what Eleanor would want," he said one night as they sat in the 15th floor hallway where they had first talked. "She always believed in investing in people, especially people who reminded her of the students she taught. I want to make you a business partner." Maria stared at him in disbelief. "Henry, I'm a janitor. I don't have any money to invest, and I barely understand half of what you've taught me." "You understand more than you think," Henry replied firmly. And as for money, I still have some assets left. Not much, but enough to start small. There's a small apartment building for sale across town. The owner is motivated to sell quickly, and with the right negotiation, we could get it for a good price. I provide the capital and experience. You provide the energy and fresh perspective. We split everything 50-50. The proposal terrified and thrilled Maria in equal measure. It was a chance to build something real, to create the kind of financial security she had only dreamed about, but it was also an enormous risk. If they failed, she could lose not only her own future, but also endanger the only real friend she had found in years. "I need to think about this," she said carefully. "Of course," Henry replied, "but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait around forever." That night, Maria went home to her small apartment and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills that never seemed to get smaller. Emma was asleep in their shared bedroom, her small face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. Maria thought about her daughter's future, about the college fund she dreamed of starting, about the safe neighborhood she wanted to move to, about the opportunities she wanted to give Emma that she herself had never had. The next morning, she called Henry and accepted his offer. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Henry used his remaining connections in the real estate world to identify the apartment building, a modest 12-unit complex in a transitional neighborhood that was just beginning to show signs of gentrification. The building was run down and had several vacant units, but Henry saw potential where others saw problems. Location, 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 he taught Maria as they walked through the property with the seller's agent. This neighborhood is going to explode in the next 5 years. The city is planning a new transit line 2 blocks away, and there are already 3 new restaurants opening on the main street. We buy this place now, invest some money in renovations, and we'll triple our investment within a decade. Maria learned to see the building through Henry's eyes. Yes, it needed new appliances and fresh paint, but the bones were solid and the rent potential was enormous. They negotiated for 3 weeks, with Henry teaching Maria every aspect of the process. How to research comparable properties, how to identify the seller's true motivations, how to structure an offer that protected their interests while still being attractive enough to get accepted. When their offer was finally accepted, Maria felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration unlike anything she had ever experienced. She was now a property owner, a businesswoman, an entrepreneur. The little girl who had grown up in government housing was now investing in real estate. But the real work was just beginning. Maria continued working her night shift at Meridian Tower while spending her days managing renovations at their new property. Henry, energized by having a real project again, threw himself into the work with an enthusiasm that reminded Maria of the successful businessman he had once been. He negotiated with contractors, supervised repairs, and handled the paperwork with an efficiency that impressed even the most experienced professionals. Within 6 months, they had transformed the rundown building into an attractive, modern apartment complex. All 12 units were rented to carefully screened tenants, and the monthly income was enough to cover the mortgage, maintenance costs, and provide each partner with a modest but steady profit. More importantly, the partnership had transformed both of their lives. Henry had found a new sense of purpose and direction. He started taking better care of himself, joined a grief support group, and even began socializing with other business owners in the neighborhood. He was still older and more serious than most people, but the bitter anger that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who had found his way back to himself. Maria, meanwhile, had discovered talents and abilities she never knew she possessed. The shy, uncertain janitor had evolved into a confident businesswoman who could negotiate with contractors, analyze market trends, and make strategic decisions about their growing enterprise. The partnership income allowed her to reduce her hours at other jobs, which meant more time with Emma, more opportunities to focus on their real estate business. But perhaps the most significant change was in their friendship itself. Henry had become like a grandfather to Emma, attending her school plays and helping with homework when Maria was working late. Emma, in turn, had brought joy and laughter back into Henry's life in a way that reminded him of the happiness he had shared with Eleanor. It was Emma who finally asked the question that had been lurking in the back of Maria's mind for months. They were having dinner in Henry's apartment, something that had become a weekly tradition, when Emma looked up from her homework and said, "Mr. Henry, if you used to own our building, who owns it now?" Henry paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, and looked at Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's a very good question, Emma," he said carefully. "Why don't you ask your mother?" Maria felt a chill run down her spine. In all their months of friendship and partnership, this was one topic that Henry had never fully explained. She knew he had once owned Meridian Tower, and she knew he had lost it when Eleanor died, but she had never pressed for details about who had bought it or under what circumstances. "Henry," she said quietly, "what aren't you telling me?" Henry set down his fork and looked at both Maria and Emma with an expression that was part sadness, part pride, and part something else that Maria couldn't identify. "The truth is," he said slowly, "I never actually sold Meridian Tower." Maria stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" When Eleanor got sick, I mortgaged everything to pay for her treatment. The building, our house, our other properties. I used them all as collateral for loans to pay medical bills. When she died and I couldn't keep up with the payments, the bank foreclosed on everything." Henry's voice was steady, but Maria could see the pain in his eyes. "Technically, the bank owns Meridian Tower now, but because of the way the foreclosure was structured, I retained certain rights as the original owner." "What kind of rights?" Maria asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Henry smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was the smile of a man who held all the cards. The right of first refusal if the bank ever decides to sell, the right to repurchase at market value with adequate financing, and most importantly, the right to reclaim ownership if I can pay off the remaining balance of the original mortgage. The room fell silent as the implications of Henry's words sank in. Maria felt her heart racing as she began to understand what he was telling her. "How much?" she whispered. "How much would it cost to buy back the building?" "According to my last conversation with the bank," Henry said quietly, "approximately $2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. It was an enormous sum, far beyond anything Maria had ever imagined dealing with. But as she looked at Henry's face, she realized that this had been his plan all along. Not just to partner with her on a small apartment building, but to teach her everything she would need to know to help him reclaim his lost empire. "You want to buy back Meridian Tower," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I want us to buy back Meridian Tower," Henry corrected. Everything I've taught you, everything we've built together, it's all been leading to this moment. Our little apartment building was just the beginning. With the right strategy, the right financing, and the right partnerships, we can make this happen." Emma looked back and forth between the two adults, not fully understanding the conversation, but sensing its importance. "Does this mean we're going to be rich?" she asked innocently. Henry laughed, and the sound was so full of joy and possibility that it brought tears to Maria's eyes. "It means we're going to try, sweetheart. It means we're going to try. Socionartes." Over the following months, Henry and Maria developed a plan that was audacious in its scope and breathtaking in its complexity. Using their successful apartment building as collateral, they began acquiring additional properties throughout the Oima city. Henry's knowledge of the market, combined with Maria's fresh perspective and boundless energy, proved to be an unstoppable combination. They started small, purchasing distressed properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, renovating them, and either selling them for quick profits or holding them for rental income. With each successful transaction, their capital grew, and their reputation in the real estate community became more established. Maria discovered that she had an intuitive understanding of market trends and customer needs that complemented Henry's analytical approach perfectly. While he focused on the numbers and the technical aspects of each deal, she concentrated on understanding the human element, what tenants wanted, what neighborhoods were becoming more desirable, what renovations would add the most value. Their partnership attracted attention from other investors, and within a year, they had formed a small investment group with several other entrepreneurs who shared their vision. The group's combined resources allowed them to take on larger projects and more ambitious goals. But it was their personal relationship that remained the foundation of their success. Henry had become the father figure that Maria had never had, and Maria had given Henry a reason to believe in the future again. Emma, now 7 and increasingly aware of the changes in their lives, had gained not only financial security, but also a grandfather who adored her, and a mother who was confident and empowered in ways that Emma could sense, even if she couldn't fully understand them. The night before they made their offer to repurchase Meridian Tower, Maria and Henry sat in the same 15th floor hallway where they had first talked, almost exactly 2 years earlier. But everything had changed. Maria was no longer wearing a janitor's uniform. Instead, she was dressed in the professional attire of a successful businesswoman. Henry was no longer the broken, angry man who had cried alone in the darkness. He was the confident, experienced entrepreneur who had rebuilt his life from nothing. "Are you nervous?" Maria asked as they sat together on the marble floor one last time. "Terrified," Henry admitted with a smile. "But it's a good kind of terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something important." "Eleanor would be proud of you," Maria said softly. Henry nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She would be proud of both of us. This foundation we talked about starting, we're going to make it happen, aren't we?" "The Morrison Gonzalez Foundation for Educational Excellence," Maria said, reciting the name they had chosen months earlier, providing scholarships and business training for single mothers and their children. "It has a nice ring to it," Henry said with satisfaction. The next morning, they submitted their offer to purchase Meridian Tower. The negotiation process took 3 weeks, during which Maria learned more about high-stakes business deals than she had ever imagined possible. But when the call finally came that their offer had been accepted, the feeling of triumph was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. On the day they signed the final papers, Maria stood in the lobby of Meridian Tower as its co-owner, remembering the nervous young woman who had started working there as a night janitor just 2 years earlier. The security guards who had once called Henry the Beast now greeted him with respect and genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson, the building manager, had become one of their most trusted employees and a key part of their growing business empire. But it was Emma's reaction that meant the most to Maria. When she told her daughter that they now owned the building where Maria used to work, Emma's eyes grew wide with amazement. "Does this mean you're the boss of everyone now?" Emma asked. "It means we have a responsibility to take care of everyone," Maria corrected gently. "Mr. Henry taught me that true success isn't about having power over people, it's about using your resources to help others succeed." That evening, as Maria stood in Henry's apartment, which was now officially her apartment too, since they owned the building, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The angry, grieving man and the struggling single mother had found in each other the missing pieces of their broken lives. Henry appeared beside her, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the kind of smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "To unexpected partnerships," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Maria replied, clinking her glass against his. "To Eleanor, who would have loved you like a daughter," Henry added softly. "And to Emma, who thinks you hung the moon," Maria finished. As they stood there together, looking out at the city lights below, Maria realized that their success was about more than money or property or business achievements. It was about the power of human connection to transform lives, the importance of believing in someone even when they don't believe in themselves, and the miraculous way that kindness, patience, and genuine care can heal even the deepest wounds. 6. Months later, the Morrison Gonzalez Foundation held its first annual scholarship ceremony. 25 single mothers received grants to pursue business training and higher education, and their children received full scholarships to private schools and summer enrichment programs. Henry and Maria stood on the stage of the Foundation's new community center, watching as families celebrated opportunities they had never dreamed possible. In the audience, Emma sat with the other children, beaming with pride as she watched her mother speak to the crowd about the importance of education, hard work, and never giving up on your dreams. She didn't fully understand all the business details, but she understood that her mother and Mr. Henry had done something important, something that was helping other families the way they had helped each other. After the ceremony, as the last of the guests were leaving, Henry and Maria found themselves alone in the community center's main hall. The walls were lined with photographs documenting their journey together, pictures of their first apartment building renovation, newspaper clippings about their business success, and candid shots of their growing family. "Do you think we've done enough?" Maria asked, looking at all the evidence of their accomplishments. Henry smiled and put his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Eleanor used to say that you've done enough when you've helped someone else believe they can do enough too." "Then I guess we're just getting started," Maria replied. And they were. Because the story of the single mother janitor and the grumpy old man who owned the building was never really about real estate or business success. It was about the extraordinary things that happen when two people choose to see past each other's circumstances and pain to the potential that lies beneath. It was about the healing power of friendship, the transformative nature of mentorship, and the incredible impact that one act of kindness can have on the world. Maria still cleaned sometimes, but now it was her own buildings she was maintaining. Henry still gave advice about property management, but now it was to a thriving business empire they had built together, and Emma grew up knowing that success wasn't something that happened to other people. It was something you created through hard work, compassion, and the courage to sit down next to someone who needed a friend, even when everyone else had given up on them. In the end, that's what changed everything. Not the money or the buildings or the business deals, but the simple decision to treat another human being with dignity and kindness when they needed it most. That's the lesson that Henry learned from Maria, that Maria learned from Henry, and that Emma would carry forward into her own life, continuing the cycle of compassion that had transformed them all.